This conference is being put on, the Caribbean Clergy Conference on the coronavirus COVID-19 vaccine is being put on and presented by Christianity for Living Ministries. Our mission is to educate, engage, empower, and equip the church and Christians on current, controversial, and consequential issues and creative approaches to effectively embrace, embody, and express God as alive, active, and available. Some of our ministry initiatives include conferences such as this one. We also have Christian community conversations. We have done a number of those over the past few years. Church consultation, which we also do. Online chat, we have not yet started that, but we're looking forward to doing so in the very near future. A concept that we call community churching, and we have employed that in a few instances and hope to expand that in the future. Another concept, vocational discipleship, which is discipleship geared towards particular professions and vocations. Sermon summary series and surveys and analyses. We have some surveys that we have done, and we're going to do some quick polls in our presentation today. So be prepared to participate in the polls that we will be offering. I just want to let you know that this presentation has no financial backing in terms of we're not doing this sponsored or on behalf of anyone else. There is no outside interest or influence on what we're doing. This is solely, entirely, 100% being provided and being presented by Christianity for Living Ministries. We're not gaining anything financially from this. This is God's work. It is a labor of love, and we're hoping that it will be a blessing to all of us, clergy, church leaders, and ministers of the gospel, particularly of the Caribbean descent. The overview of the conference is to provide a framework from which clergy, church leaders, and ministers can approach and in which they can operate concerning the coronavirus COVID-19 vaccine as it pertains to our parishioners as well as to ourselves. There are a few things that are developing as we speak regarding the coronavirus COVID-19. We are recently now hearing that many of the experts are saying that it will become an endemic, meaning to say that it will not just go away, but it will be with us likely for the foreseeable future. In light of that, polls also show that some polls do, that 52% of the Black community have indicated that they will not or plan not to become vaccinated. And that is interesting when you also consider that 59%, a higher percentage of the Black Protestants, which I am assuming represents many of us here on the Zoom, 59% of our parishioners, and maybe 59% including us, some of us, have also indicated pretty much the same thing. And there have also been reports that workers in the health care field are denying or turning down the being vaccinated at a higher rate than anticipated. It has not been demographically broken down, but we know in the Caribbean community that many of our people work in the healthcare industry and in the healthcare field. And so I'm sure that this touches and don't know how indicative or representative it is of our community. So in light of these things, there is this need for this conference because our Caribbean parishioners are turning to clergy, turning to their church leaders, turning to their pastors for direction and for guidance, probably even more so than trusting scientists, the medical field, and government officials. And therefore, it becomes even more important that we clergy be able to give an answer and be able to respond to the inquiries of our parishioners and our congregants. And so we have before you, hence this presentation, we're going to have a three-prong approach. It will be medical, looking at it from a medical perspective, providing medical information. And we have on tap and on board for us this afternoon, Dr. Harold Mignot. You will hear a little bit more about him in a moment. Theological and biblical paradigms and perspectives, Reverend Christopher Nielsen, and that's myself, that will delve into that a little bit. And pastoral care approach. And we have Bishop David Henfield, who will give us some information in that regard. Right before we get into the presentations, starting with the medical information, right before we do that, we have a couple polls. As I told you before, this is interactive. You will be participating. We have a couple polls that we would like for you to do. It's only going to take a few minutes, not a few minutes, actually a few seconds, just a couple polls. The first poll, if we could pull that up and just answer it, and the results, we'll share the results with you. The first poll are, what areas do you have? It should be popping up. What areas do you have questions in concerning the coronavirus COVID-19 vaccine? And it's multiple choice, so you can click all three, or you can click one or two. Okay, so just go ahead right now and answer that. And when you give your answer, just click submit, and we will get the result right away. All right, so we'll close out. We'll close this out so we can see the result. Okay, you see the result there, that 80% of us are asking and looking for information on the vaccine. Dr. Mignot, please take note of that. Certainly, we're looking forward to that information. 47% biblical, 27% pastoral care. So we have a high percentage of interest. And so we're looking forward to being able, hopefully, to address and answer the questions and the concerns that you have this evening. The second poll, and we'll get ready to do that. The second poll, what questions and or concerns are you hearing from your congregants or members regarding the coronavirus COVID-19 vaccine? Again, this is multiple choice. You don't have to just give one answer. You can select as many as you would like. Okay, we'll go ahead and close it out now, and let's see the results. Okay. You see the results there, 73% distrust in the quick process science, 45% distrust born out of historical abuse, 27% cultural concerns, lack of biblical knowledge. No one has expressed that as a concern. Job security, conspiracy theories, and a lack of information about the vaccine, 82%. Okay, thank you so much. So with that in mind, we're going to start off with the medical information, and we have a fantastic doctor with us this evening. He is Dr. Harold Mignot. He is board certified in internal medicine, retired after 25 years as faculty at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He has had numerous roles over those 25 years as attending physician at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, medical director of the Edward S. Cooper Internal Medicine Practice, medical director of the Comedin Clinic, director of minority recruitment and development in the Department of Medicine and the Center of Excellence, advisor to starting the hospitalist program at Penn. He has also authored and published numerous chapters, reviews, and other articles. He has also been recognized as receiving the Sylvan Eisman Award as Outstanding Primary Care Physician in the University of Pennsylvania Healthcare System, John Eisenberg Teaching Award for the Division of General Internal Medicine, and was named consecutive years from 2010 through 2014 by the Philadelphia Tribune as one of the most influential African Americans in Philadelphia. He has had a number of community initiatives, starting a men's health program in the Philadelphia community that lasted for 10 years, co-founder of the Jamaica Trade Council of Greater Philadelphia, and as original and former member of the Diaspora Advisory Council to the Jamaican government, has worked on programs aimed at the improvement in health and education. As you may be able to tell, he hails from Jamaica. And so I, with great excitement, present to you Dr. Harold Mignot.
Thank you, Reverend Nielsen, and good evening to everybody. I am actually happy to see the poll that my lecture here won't go in vain, because I think I'll be able to allay some of the concerns that are expressed in this poll. But I also know that we have time constraints, so I will get right to the presentation. I wanted to start off by just saying where we are in the state of the disease for now. The SARS-CoV-19 cases that we have in the United States, these are US numbers, are about 23 million cases since the pandemic started. Of the last 7 days, we had about 1.7 million cases. Total deaths over the period has been about 383,000, with 4,000 new deaths as of yesterday on a daily basis. So this is still a raging pandemic at this stage. Now, I also wanted to go in a little bit of the things that you need to look for in terms of symptoms. I believe parishioners may come to you for advice and whether they should get medical care or not. But the folks with COVID-19 symptoms generally develop symptoms anywhere from 2 to 14 days after you've been exposed. And the symptoms are typically viral symptoms: fever, chills, cough, muscle aches and pains, body aches. But the one I really want you to pay attention to, which seems to be more specific to this virus, is the loss of taste or smell. When somebody gives you those symptoms, then it's likely that they have the coronavirus. So who should get tested in this virus? Ideally, everybody should get tested, because if you knew your status, we could mitigate the transmission of the virus. But we live in a world now where not everybody can be tested. But the people who generally should be tested are people who have symptoms of COVID-19, people who have been in close contact with someone with COVID-19. So if you've been within 6 feet of somebody who later tests positive for the virus, usually for more than 15 minutes, then you should be tested. And people who take part in high-risk activities, for example, going to the crowded bar or restaurant, traveling, the large gatherings, such as nowadays we have protests and near riots. And if you've been involved in any of those, you definitely should be tested. And then, of course, if you've been asked to be tested by your healthcare provider. Now, most people with the coronavirus, with the COVID-19, are asymptomatic. That is true. Most people are asymptomatic. And those are the people actually that are most significant in the transmission of the disease, because you don't know you have it and you continue to socialize and not take precautions, then you can pass it on to somebody even though you're symptomatic. But if you have certain symptoms, you have to be aware and seek medical attention. The thing that we do in our community is that we delay seeking medical attention. And that's why you see higher death rate or higher complication from most diseases. The symptoms to pay attention to: if you have trouble breathing, if you're short of breath, if you have persistent pain in your chest, if you're confused or have trouble staying awake, or if you notice that your lips, your hands, your fingers are blue, or your face is turning blue, then you definitely need to call 911 and find medical help. Of course, as in this pandemic, we have figured out certain ways that you can mitigate the risk of transmission of the disease. Wearing a mask is important. Now, the wearing the mask doesn't necessarily say you're not going to get the disease, but it certainly protects you from severe disease. What we have noticed is that the virus is dependent on the dose that you get. So the longer you stay in contact with the virus and the more exposures you get, the more likely you are to get more severe disease. So the mask will decrease that risk of getting more severe disease, and it prevents you from passing it on to other people as well. 6 feet apart is considered a distance of safety. Again, it doesn't mean that you won't get it, but it means that you may decrease the dose of the virus that you get. And certainly in this day, avoid crowds if you can. Make sure that you stay safe. There are certain people who have the risk of severe disease, and that's older people. If you're 65 or older, you're at the highest risk for severe complications and death from this disease. Medical conditions such as diabetes, chronic heart failure, other chronic medical disease, COPD, smoking, you're at increased risk for the disease. But one thing we want to say, the young people who feel invincible, if you're living with grandma is over 65 years old, you need to protect grandma, so you need to take all the precautions so you don't bring the disease home and affect grandma. And here's what we're talking about. 80% of the deaths that have been reported so far are in people who are 65 years or older. 80% of the deaths are in people who are 65 years or older. One of the issues that we brought up just now, the other risk factor is ethnic and social factors. In the minority groups, we see an increased risk of complications and death as well, hospitalization. And this is from the CDC, by the way. This slide is from the CDC. I didn't make this up. Discrimination is one of the factors that play a role as to why minorities have an increased risk of severity of disease. It comes on where discrimination affects your access to healthcare, to housing, to education, in the criminal justice system, and to finances. And all these end up playing a role in what kind of conditions you live in and how affected this virus, you would be affected by this virus. It basically goes across the gamut of access to healthcare, lack of insurance, lack of education. So you're ended up in the jobs that tend to be the frontline job where you can't get a day off. You have to be in the crowd, and so those kind of activities put you at increased risk for contracting the virus. The other issue that was brought up in the poll is the issue of the distrust of the system. The Tuskegee experiment, for example, is etched in the minds of most Afro-Americans. And as I went through medical school, it was one of the things that was brought up to us as why minorities distrust the system. For those of you who don't understand, the Tuskegee experiment was when folks were experimented on. Black males in the South were given syphilis and were not treated, and so that they could see the extent of the disease or the natural history of the disease. And of course, a lot of people suffered permanent damage. There are also experiments on people in sterilization without their permission. So all those things together in the minority community makes it the poll, what your parishioners are saying, that they do not trust the system and they are wary of this vaccine. Now, just since we're talking about the clergy, there are certain things that you can do to help your parishioners, and one is to educate them on the issue of how do you protect yourself in this pandemic, wearing the mask, washing your hands, keeping social distance. Certainly for those who run religious institutions, you certainly can open your institutions to testing, and I think look at ways of partnering with healthcare institutions, so you may be a site of vaccination, because that's another issue that's going to become more of an obstacle to getting minorities to getting this vaccine. Now, if the churches would partner with the healthcare institutions, that would help in people feeling more comfortable with the vaccine. Now, since April to now, there have been some change in the treatment of the coronavirus. So it's not all doom and gloom. As you rightfully heard, although people are still dying, the death rate has decreased. There's one drug that's been approved by the FDA to treat COVID-19, and that's remdesivir. Remdesivir slows the viral replication and thus help the severity of the disease. It's given in the hospital. The other thing that has come aboard is the use of steroids, which has decreased the risk of being on the ventilator and also decreased the risk of death. So those things, if you happen to end up in the hospital, will help to decrease the risk of death. There are also two monoclonal antibody cocktails that have been used in people who are at increased risk, so like the elderly. They have been used, companies Regeneron and Eli Lilly has gotten those emergency use authorization. And you've heard it in the news. The president actually got the Regeneron cocktail when he had his episode, and he seemed to think that it was a miracle. So here we go to the vaccine. The vaccine is now a game changer, but it's useless if we don't take it. It really is as a matter now, it has to get to the population to mitigate the risk of this disease. There are three types of vaccines currently that are being studied. There are two vaccines on the market. The types of vaccine is the protein subunit vaccine, and this is a vaccine that a piece of the protein from the virus is taken and then put in a vector and injected into the body. The body recognizes that piece of protein as foreign and then starts an immune response to it. It then develops a memory, so if the virus ever comes with that protein, the virus the body will start to fight it. The other type of vaccine, which is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, when you listen later, this vaccine is the third one that's going to come out. It's called a vector vaccine. And that vaccine is more of the traditional way of making vaccine. They take a weakened virus or something like a cold virus that won't harm you, and they take the genetic material from this virus, the COVID virus, puts it into that vector, injects it into the body. The body then makes the protein to the coronavirus, and then that protein simulates an immune response, and the same memory system is set up that if the coronavirus is ever introduced into your body, it would be attacked by your immune system. The third type of vaccine is the one that's on the market. It's the mRNA vaccine, and mRNA stands for messenger RNA. It's a copy of the DNA, which gives protein. And I'll just briefly tell you, the DNA in the nucleus of a cell does not come out of the cell. It stays in the cell forever, unless that cell dies. To make proteins from the DNA, say you needed more insulin, the DNA makes a copy into what's called an RNA and a messenger RNA, and that RNA comes out of the nucleus and comes into the cell and manufactures the protein. So what they've done with these vaccines is to make a copy of the protein. It's called the spike protein. The spike protein is necessary for the virus to get into the cell. This copy of this protein, protein genetic material, is then loaded into what's called a liposome, a nanoparticle, and that particle is then injected into your body. It's taken up by a cell, and the protein is made by your body and presented to the immune system. We'll go into that a little bit more detail on the next slides, but most of these vaccines will need 2 shots. The first shot will give you about a 50 to 60% protection. The second shots of the mRNA vaccine, for example, will bring you up to 95% protection. The one vaccine that you will need 1 shot is the third one that's coming out, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that I just mentioned. It's in the last stages of the phase 3 trial, and maybe sometime at the end of February will be available for use, and that vaccine will be a 1-shot vaccine, which gives you 90% protection. So briefly, as we were talking about these mRNA and how it works, this is just a schematic to show you. A virus typically has a cell, not really a cell because it doesn't have a nucleus, but it's parts of a cell which has a membrane with a number of proteins on the membrane. These proteins will facilitate the virus getting into the cell when it invades your body. Inside the virus is the genetic material, which is usually in this virus is an RNA. This genetic material will encode each of these proteins. And this is a spike protein, for example, will have a genetic code embedded in this. It took them about 24 hours to map the genetic code of this virus. And that after the mapping in 24 hours, they could send it to the lab via the internet, by an email, for example. And the lab can then manufacture the mRNA in 24 hours. This mRNA is then encapsulated, like I told you, in the capsule, and then injected into the body, and it creates the immune response that then protects you the next time the body sees this spike protein. How much time do I have, Reverend Nielsen, in terms of?
A few more minutes, Doctor. Go ahead.
Okay. The vaccine is, to date, has been 11 million doses have been used in the vaccine. So it's been widely used so far in both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. And that so far, in terms of the complications of the vaccine, there are about 20 cases of severe allergic reaction. One physician in Florida died 2 weeks after the vaccine. They don't think it necessarily has to do anything with the vaccine, but they're investigating that case. But there have been no other significant adverse effects on the vaccine. So about these mRNA vaccines, you cannot get COVID from the vaccine, because the vaccine is a piece of genetic material that just encodes a protein. It can't form the virus, so there's no way for you to get COVID-19 from the vaccine. The vaccine does not enter your DNA. It doesn't get into the nucleus of the cell. There's no way that mRNA can get into the DNA. And after it encodes the protein to be made, it's broken down by the cell. This is a normal process. So there's no memory of this genetic material in your system. The issue of whether these vaccines have been rushed, these vaccines have actually been worked on over the last 30 years. The mRNA technology actually started at the University of Pennsylvania back in the 90s. It's been worked on for other vaccines such as the Zika, the flu, rabies, and CMV. Now, one of the issues why these other vaccines are not so quick to come to market is because most of these outbreaks, like the Zika virus and so forth, they're really slow outbreaks, and it takes longer to see the clinical picture if you're trying to make a vaccine. This pandemic has actually been like so rapid that Pfizer has been able to get their clinical research done in 2 months because there were so many available participants in the research. And so that actually has made the speed. There are other things about the manufacturing that has made this vaccine also quicker to come to market. And I have a slide that if I have time, I'll get back to that to let you see that process. But in terms of the efficacy of these vaccines, as I told you, they're about 95% effective after you've gotten your 2 doses. The 2 doses are given about 3 weeks apart. The first dose, as I told you, you get about a 60% protective effect, and then the second dose brings you up to 95%. The third vaccine coming out will be about 90% effective. Now, this is significant because most of the other vaccines, like the flu vaccine, there's some years when the flu vaccine is about 30% effective. Most vaccines, good vaccines, are about 50 to 60%, maybe 70% effective, and we'd be happy with that. So these vaccines are outperforming the general vaccine. Now, of the 95% that it prevents the viral infection, the other 5%, at least, it has been shown to decrease the risk of hospitalizations and death. Nobody who has gotten the vaccine has shown any death from the coronavirus. The side effects of the vaccine, the most common side effects are what we call local reactions, where you get the injection, you get pain and swelling and redness. That's normal. You may get some headaches, chills, or tiredness. That's also normal. And usually these start within a day or 2 after getting the vaccine. And it actually illustrates that the vaccine is working if you get any of those symptoms. The big side effects is the allergic reaction, which can cause a condition called anaphylaxis, which people can die from. And it usually occurs 15 to 30 minutes after you've gotten the injection. And that's why they say when you're getting the vaccine, you should hang around with the doctors in 15 to 30 minutes, for 15 to 30 minutes at least, because at the time, if you develop that severe allergic reaction, you can be treated. There are some people who have fainted after getting the vaccine. It's called a vasovagal reaction. It's just normal thing. Some people faint after they experience pain or fright. And then the local reactions. The only one that's contraindicated that you don't get the second dose is if you've had the immediate allergic reaction. They don't recommend getting the second dose of the vaccine. If you fainted because you got scared or because you had pain, you can get the second vaccine. And if you have the regular side effects, you certainly can get the second dose. The vaccine does not 100% protect you from the disease. No vaccine is 100% effective. The issue that people may ask, do I need to wear a mask after I take this vaccine? The answer is that we don't really know, but since we don't have the information, it's best to wear a mask after taking the vaccine, at least until you're fully vaccinated. And we still won't know for some time whether, even when you're fully vaccinated, if you can give somebody the disease by not wearing a mask. So you definitely need to continue the social distancing and wearing a mask even after you get the vaccine. Now, I had told Reverend Nielsen that I wasn't going to go through the myths, but I realized that this is a big thing in terms of talking about these myths. And I can see it from the poll that people are concerned about these myths. So I want to go through a couple of them and kind of debunk them. The first one is that, again, people say that the vaccine is not safe because it was rapidly developed and tested. The vaccine is safe. The technology that we have today has allowed us to be more rapid in the development of the vaccines. It's not a fly-by-night issue. Most of the platform for the vaccine has taken 30 years to get to this point. But because we can now sequence the DNA in 24 hours, and because we can manufacture the protein in 24 hours, it allows for quick development of a vaccine. And as a matter of fact, the two companies actually produced the vaccine at a risk that it was not going to be approved by the FDA. They actually produced the vaccine prior to the approval of the FDA, so they were able to bring it to market much quicker. So, and it's gone through the rigorous tests. Now, you say the FDA only took a few days to go through the approval process, when normally it takes about a year or two. Well, when it takes a year or two, it's really sitting, the drug approval is really sitting in the FDA for a year or two until they get to it. It's not like they've been working on it for a year or two. So this is because of the emergency, this became priority and everything else was pushed back so they could get to this vaccine. The other thing, if I have COVID and I recovered, I don't need to get the vaccine. Again, we don't know what kind of immunity you get from having COVID, and therefore we recommend that you get the vaccine even if you've had COVID, because we know how the vaccine protects you. There are severe side effects from the vaccine. I just went through that about what the side effects are, and the likelihood of getting any real severe vaccine side effects are limited. We talked about the issue of the mask after COVID vaccine. You really do need to wear a mask. And this is one that I see in the internet that's hit like wildfire, that people say, well, you only get a 1% to 2% mortality rate with this virus, so why do we need a vaccine? You actually see the raw numbers. Is it acceptable to have 4,000 people die a day from this disease? And a 1% rate is about 10 times the amount of people who die from the flu. So it makes sense to get the vaccine and decrease the deaths of this. You know, we make these assumptions when we don't see it hit close to home. But when your family member starts dying, you'll change your mind about whether you should get this vaccine or not. Some of the other things that some of the folks in my family, especially talks about in religion, the fetal tissue is an issue. These vaccines are not made with fetal tissues. There is no issue there. They're made in the lab, and there is no human tissue or other parts that are used to make these vaccines. The microchip issue, that the vaccines have this microchip that they can track you after you get injected. There is no microchip associated with these vaccines. It's mRNA. And by the way, if you're worried about being tracked, that cell phone that you have on you, they know exactly where you are and where you're going next and where you've been. If you drive from New Jersey to New York, they can follow you and tell you exactly where you are. So if you're worried about being tracked, you need to put it someplace else, because this vaccine is not how they're going to track you. The other thing, COVID will alter my DNA. Again, I think I've stressed that enough, that the mRNA does not get into the nucleus and will not leave any genetic imprint. It is degraded by the body after it makes the protein. A lot of my patients object to the flu vaccine, for example, because it's made in eggs. That's a traditional way of making vaccines, that the virus is grown in eggs. This vaccine has there are no eggs, there are no preservatives, there's nothing that gives you allergies. People with severe allergies, we know they react to the vaccine, but it's less of the issue of the manufacturing of the vaccine and more of the issue of the patient themselves. And this final one about luciferase, I have heard that from my family too, that because it says Lucifer in there, it must be some evil connotation to this vaccine. Luciferase, and I put it in there because really I have had significant arguments about this. Luciferase is an enzyme that's in the firefly. It's really related to the color yellow, and it allows scientists to um, track when the mRNA gets into the cell when you're doing your experiments in animals. It's not used in the manufacture of the vaccine when it gets to the human level. It has nothing to do with Lucifer or the devil or any such things. And so when people bring this out, you really should be prepared to answer them, to say that this has nothing to do with um, the devil. I think I went through that quickly, and I hope it was pretty clear. And I will be open to questions or at the end of the presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mignot. Quite a presentation. We're going to open it up. If you have just a few questions, as I said, we do have some time constraints, but just a few questions. If you can type them in the chat, that would be good. Hopefully everybody knows how to do that. The chat is there. We'll be looking at the chat and seeing if we have any questions. I tell you what, since it looks like maybe some of you are typing, but if that's going to take a little bit of a time, if you could unmute yourself, everybody please do remain muted, but if you can unmute yourself, if you have a question, please do so, and we'll acknowledge you, and you can go right ahead and ask Dr. Mignot the question.
I don't know of any contraindications to Caribbean folks. Now, most of the vaccines will have some side effects, and as we said, no vaccine is 100%. And if you like malaria, for example, it probably is about 70% effective in terms of being treated. I don't know if it's not a malaria vaccine, but so so that means that if you had 10 people and you gave them the vaccine, 3 are at risk for getting disease in most vaccination scenarios. So it probably has more to do with that more than the heritage of the people who were vaccinated. But I don't know if any in this. And you look at the data with the trials, there were about 10% in each trial of Afro-Americans, for example, and their profile did not seem any different from the other participants in the trial. So, and now we have, 11 million people given the vaccine, and we haven't seen anything developed yet in terms of whether there is a delineation between race, for example, and the vaccine response.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dr. Mignot. There are a couple of questions in the chat that I just want to get to. Couple people have asked pretty much how do you respond to the fact that there are highly qualified professionals who are saying opposite some of the things that, for instance, that you gave in your presentation, some are saying that DNA would be changed. Some are just saying a lot of things opposite of what you're saying. What's your response to that?
Well, I do consider myself a highly qualified professional as well. That's the response. But I'm going based on evidence. I mean, a lot of people do have conjecture, and if you can show me the evidence that there's any DNA change, I mean, I will listen to the argument. But the evidence that I've had so far, looking at all the data, looking at the history of this vaccine, going back to the days of Penn and the mRNA progression, we have just not seen that DNA is changed. And also from the standpoint that the messenger RNA is degraded after the vaccine is sent into the body, which is a normal process. Again, people will say anything. There are a lot of stuff on the internet that's just based in conjecture or beliefs, but you need to show evidence. And nobody has shown me evidence that DNA changes.
Okay. Thanks for that, Doctor. There's another question, and I'll make this the last question, but I'm combining many of the questions that are on the chat. One has to do with why is it so exceptional if it's not a cure? And second part of that, which is from another person related to it, is how is it that the vaccine is 90% effective, even though the flu vaccine continues, that has been around for quite a while, continues to be 30% less. I don't know how true that is, but the person is indicating that roughly the flu vaccine is about 60% effective. So what makes this vaccine so effective while the flu vaccine is not as effective? And why a big deal out of it if why is it mandated? And I'm not sure that it is being mandated, but why is it mandated if it is not a cure?
Okay, so you're right. It's not mandated. The vaccine is going to be totally voluntary at this stage. So the flu vaccine is a very different platform. It's a very different way that the vaccine is manufactured. The flu vaccine is grown in eggs. It's a whole different technology, and most in the scientific community and the medical community is really surprised about the effectiveness of this vaccine. When they came out with a study that showed 90 to 95% effectiveness of the vaccine, most people initially did not believe it because you do not expect vaccines to be that effective. Now, you will hear people who got the flu vaccine say, even though I got the vaccine, I got the flu. And that's because of the less effectiveness of the flu vaccine. But it's still useful if you can decrease the prevalence of the disease by even 30%. That prevalence will have an impact on how many people die from the disease. So the flu vaccine is still relevant. They are now looking at this platform with the mRNA to see if they can improve the flu vaccine. We say there are times when the flu vaccine can be very effective, 60 to 70%, but there are some years when it comes out to be 30%. And so they're looking at this platform, for example. Moderna is doing the studies now, looking at these flu vaccines to see if you can improve the efficacy using this new platform.
Okay. And just one quick last question. And by the way, I want to acknowledge, apparently some people, the reception it's poor. Some people are not getting a great reception. We apologize for that. And hopefully that you'll be able to listen to the recording if you cannot hear clearly. Last question, what about the conflict with current medications that the patient may be taking? Any concerns about that? The vaccine interfere with the medicine that people are taking?
We have seen no conflicts. Again, you have to answer these questions again in the context that this is new and we have limited data, but so far we have seen no conflict. And from the standpoint of what we expect, we shouldn't expect any conflict. As a matter of fact, the CDC does say that you should make sure that you continue your medications and not stop medications related to the disease or to the vaccine.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mignot. Do stay on because I'm sure that if any questions come up with the other presentations and you are best suited to answer that, we would love to have you answering that. Thank you again for that. And again, I want to remind everyone that it's being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit this after this presentation. I want to move on to the theological, biblical component, and I am going to be presenting that. And just a little bit about me. I am the founder and president CEO of Christianity for Living Ministries that is presenting this. I'm also a pastor of the Living Church. I was raised Pentecostal, to kind of give you a little bit of denominational flavor. I was raised Pentecostal, Open Bible to be exact, out of Jamaica, and I was trained in a Lutheran seminary, both both degrees, Master of Divinity and Master of Sacred Theology, with a focus on sociology of religion and church and community, or church and society. And I've also been an ordained United Methodist pastor. I'm no longer United Methodist, but I have been ecumenical throughout my ministry. So I do fellowship with the Baptist, and I've done a lot of work with Baptist churches as well, and look forward to continuing to work across all denominations. I do not have a preference. My background is that way, and that's the way God has created me, I guess. So I look forward to the opportunity of working with all denominations. I've also had the opportunity of working with Church of God and Church of God of Prophecy. I have done a number of services for Jamaica Independence, organized those services, and one of the prevalent churches is Church of God, as well as Seventh-day Adventists. So so that's my background in a nutshell. I just want to lift up 5 paradigms for you to consider. Just 5 paradigms out of the text, out of the scriptures, for you to consider and use as a framework when you're talking about approaching an issue such as this. And I'm going to try to run through them as quickly as possible. The first is the creation narrative, that creation is good, that what God has created is good. We find that in the Genesis narrative, and there, from that we can glean that faith and science can be compatible, and they can be suitable for each other. They're not antagonistic towards each other. Science can serve the role of God's purpose. It can also explore and um, open up to our understanding what God has created, and the vaccine can be seen as something that gives the body the capacity to heal. Now that's one tradition. There are many there's some traditions that look at the creation narrative and see from that the inclusion of science, the inclusion of medicine as being a part of God's creation, and that there are tools that God has given to us. Now, I do know that there are other traditions that can see science and may see medicine as antagonistic and as abusive in some respects to nature and to God's creation. But I just want to lift up that paradigm before you of the notion of looking at creation as good, and the relationship of science and the vaccine to that. The second paradigm that we can look at is an interesting one that I see out of the book of Numbers, the 21st chapter. There's a story there that you may be familiar with in the wilderness, as the children of Israel are making their way. They rebel against Moses and God sends some fiery serpents, seen as God's judgment upon the people. They bite them, poisonous. They bite them, they kill them. The people come to Moses and say, "Call this off. We apologize. Please forgive us, and please pray to God and ask God to remove all of this." Moses does so, and what God does is absolutely interesting. What he does is that he tells Moses to make a poisonous snake, which Moses does out of bronze, and Moses puts it on a pole and basically says to the people, when you look at this, when you get bitten, if you get bitten, look at this serpent and you will be made well. And that's exactly what happened. And what I take out of that story is an interesting thing, that the vaccine, and we know that, there's a new technology in the vaccine now, but the way vaccines work, as Dr. Mignot indicated, is traditionally has been a watered down version of the virus that is put in our bodies that give the body an ability to develop an immunity as it reacts to it. And what I see here is an interesting thing, that the very thing, the poisonous snakes that were biting and killing the people, is the very thing that God uses for them to be healed. And I see a little lesson there. I see something there, a nod to certainly how vaccines work in that particular story. Now, there's a caveat that comes later on in Second Kings around the 18th chapter, because eventually what happens is that, particularly during the monarchy of Israel, that they actually started to worship the serpent. And so when we get to Second Kings 18, they had to destroy it because they were worshiping it. And I think there's a caveat, when we talk about vaccines and the cure-all and the be-all, and people at the altar of vaccines, or following the science, so to speak, where science becomes the rule, and people feel that it has replaced spirituality. But certainly they can coexist, and the paradigms here do suggest that. A third paradigm that I quickly want to lift up is that of Jesus as healer. One of the main things that Jesus does in his ministry is heal. And not just spiritual healing, not just connecting people with God, but also physical healing. He was a man that healed individuals, whether they were lame or they were blind. He healed groups, whether they were people with leprosy. He healed multitudes, and he even saw his ministry that way. That's what he did when he read the scroll in Luke, the 4th chapter, and he quoted from Isaiah, where he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me. And he went through different things. And one of the things is to bring sight to the blind, is to heal. And I know sometimes we have a tendency to spiritualize some of what Jesus says, but if you really look at the text, and it's not just, sometimes we tend to spiritualize by quoting certain gospels and really not looking at what the other gospel writers have to say. So we may quote Matthew, for instance, but not look at the Lucan version of it. And when you look at the Lucan version, for instance, Luke says, preach to the poor. He didn't say the poor in spirit, but we have a tendency to spiritualize that. And similarly, when he talks about the sick, it's not just about spiritual sickness. It's also about physical. And so Jesus was healer. He was a man described by those on the road to Emmaus, a man that was great in mighty in word and deed. And so this tradition of healing was a part of Jesus's ministry. It was also a part of the ministry of the apostles, Peter and Paul. And even when we get into 3rd John, around the second verse, the writer there says, I wish that you also be in good health as your soul is prospering. So there is a concern in Christianity, early Christianity, certainly, with one's physical health. And so we cannot ignore that as Christians, and affirm that Jesus is healer. Now, I do know that there are some traditions out there that will see the healing of Jesus as being antithetical or opposite science. In other words, Jesus was healing even though science couldn't do it, or the miraculous. And so the perception is that healing of Jesus is miraculous and outside of science. And that certainly, as I acknowledge that there are certain traditions that will like to look at it that way. But I, again, present this as a paradigm that Jesus is healer. The fourth paradigm and perspective that I like to present is that a Christian perspective of consideration for others, brother's keeper, or loving neighbor as yourself. Loving neighbor as yourself, second and great commandment that Jesus gives out of Leviticus, is something that we as Christians need to pay attention to. We need to be, that it's not just ourselves. We are called not just to be concerned about ourselves. Look not just at yourself, Paul says in Philippians, the second chapter, and also in Corinthians, the 8th chapter. I believe 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, that deals with food that is offered to idols. Paul's argument is that you can't just be concerned about yourself. As Christians, we have to be also passionately concerned about our brothers and our sisters. And, when we talk about issues of vaccination and we talk about one's health, it is not just in a vacuum. It's not just about yourself, but it is understanding the impact that what your actions do and have on others. And Dr. Mignot in his presentation spoke a lot about that. So again, I present that as another thought in that framework that you can use as a minister and as clergy when approaching this issue of vaccination. On the final paradigm and the final perspective that I like to present is that of counting the cost, weighing the pros and the cons, looking at the costs and the benefit, looking at the reward and the risks. Jesus in the Gospel of Luke talks about, who is going to build a house without counting the cost? Who is going to go to war without counting the cost? And of course, in that context, he is talking about discipleship. But in a generic way, what he's basically saying is that you need to weigh what's in front of you. Your approach has to be that is astute and that is studious and that is contemplative and reflective. So we as Christians are called to weigh the options, look at what's in front of us, and consider the reward versus the risks. And it's not a cut and dry. It's not a black and white. It's not an easy, clear cut thing in front of us. But we have to be responsible. We have to be diligent to pay attention to the information that's in front of us. And that's why we're doing this. We're presenting you with this information so that you can make an informed decision. So I present to you these paradigms and these perspectives, biblical, that you can employ as you approach and deal with this pandemic and this COVID-19. And I'm going to stop right there. And if there are any questions, and given time, we're just cutting down on things a little bit. But if there are any burning questions that anybody may have, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it or type it in the chat. We'll take a look at it. All right. While you're thinking about it, if you don't have any, and maybe I was clear enough on that, we're going to take a poll very quickly. For those of you that may be joining me, may not be familiar with the poll, but we have a poll that we're going to ask you on what we just presented a while ago. And the poll should be popping up any minute now. Okay, so here's the poll. Here's the question. It's just one question. Which of the principles or the paradigms work for you? For those of you that are, that's a little patwa. Which one of them, or one or two or three, any number? We presented 5 paradigms. Which one of them work for you? Any of them? And again, it's multiple choice, so you can indicate all of them, some of them, Uh, and we'll just give you a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, we'll close the poll and just take a quick look at the results. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for your response right there. I want to move on to our third and final presentation, and that is from a pastoral care perspective. We know that when people approach you and they ask you a question, you know, depending on how comfortable you may feel responding to that. So we want to give you some tools that you can employ in being able to answer this. And the person to do that is Bishop David Henfield. He is a retired trauma chaplain at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. Has been there, operated in that capacity for 16 years. He has been a pastor for 31 years, currently pastor of Grace Community Church of God of Prophecy. And in terms of an island man, he's an island man. His island, where he's from, is Turks and Caicos Islands. So we welcome Bishop David Henfield. Bishop Henfield, the floor is yours.
It's good to be with you all tonight, listening to Dr. McNaughton's presentation and your presentation. And from a pastoral care standpoint, one of the main lessons in pastoral care is to help someone to experience themselves as a child of God. And oftentimes it's difficult to talk with people if they are not there in that position. So a matter like this, where there are left, right, ups and down, it's a difficult thing, because in this culture will come in, and upbringing will come in, what they learn in the home will come in, all of this. But from a pastoral point of view, I believe this is an opportunity that pastors and other ministers can sit and present to the congregation and share with them. And you made it very clear about the healing process. And it's an opportunity to share with them what healing is about. Yes, some will be afraid, some will have mistrust, but our work is to see if we can help them get clear that. And the way to get clear that is to talk with them. And oftentimes one conversation do not do that. You have to go back to them 2 and 3 times sometime and share with them and let them know that you care about their well-being. We are not in a position to force anything down anyone's throat. We have to be gentle with them and giving them instruction. And as time goes along, we will find that they will come out of that feelings, and their feelings will be changed. So when we think about this situation that we are in, there is a lot of work to be done. And I believe that the pastoral care in the hospitals right now are working overtime because of the situation. Parishioners will come to pastors with situation, with questions, and we have to be ready and equipped to answer those questions. So tonight, I would leave with you that the information that we have received tonight, particularly from Dr. McNaughton, it's very, very important. And I will call it tools to put in my toolbox that I did not have before. And I hope the pastors that who have listened in, they can take these tools and use them properly in helping the parishioners or the community of their church. So tonight, the short version, that's what I believe with you, to help our people experience themselves as children of God and put the tools in the toolbox. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop David. I know time constraints are working on you there. Do you have, two or three things that you would maybe want to specify? Listening. You talked about going back two or three times. How to make them comfortable, identifying with them, things like that. Do you have any information on that? And I'll open it up to any questions that anyone may have also.
Yes, attentive listening is very important. Hear what the person saying and work with that rather than injecting your own agenda, your own thoughts. Listen to what the person is saying to you, and you can help them with that. And you can help them, I should say.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? That question, I'm sure you will get a million responses depending on what tradition you belong to. But I will share with you how I have addressed it and how I would address it. The concept of the end of days is one that's interesting within certain traditions. The early church believed that Jesus was coming any day. That's the early church. I'm going back to before the Gospels were written. You see this quite often in the Pauline text, that Paul, particularly early Paul, expected, Thessalonians expected Jesus to come any minute, and his theology was around that. Whatever position you find yourself in, stay there. Okay, don't try to change, because God is coming any minute. And as that time went on and God did not come, we see some of the again, how I read the text, we see some of the scriptures. For instance, in Matthew, the 24th chapter, around about there, the 25th chapter, the parable of the virgins. And those are parables that are dealing with the issue of the delay in the coming of God. So, it's the warning now to the Christians, don't fall asleep. Stay awake, don't fall asleep. And Paul talks about it later on in some of his writings, in terms of, don't become complacent, because Jesus hasn't come yet. Down throughout history, every generation has thought that Jesus was coming. Every generation has thought that the signs of the time indicate that he is coming right now. And so we are not unique in that. We are not any different in that. We are told that a day is like 1,000 to God, and 1,000 in the reverse. And therefore, for me, the most important thing is not so much the end of days, but my preparedness. It's not the when, but it is the fact that one is prepared for it. That one, so that when it happens, whenever that is, that one is prepared for it. And that means how one lives his or her life. So we don't live it, we don't live it in fear of the end of days, but we live it in preparation for it. Because Paul says that it should not come upon us as a thief in the night, and that it should not be something that is surprising to us. So my response to people is, rather than being concerned about the end of days, be concerned about how you are living your life day in and day out. Because Jesus may not come during your lifetime, but it is appointed unto humanity once to die, and after that, the judgment. So if Jesus comes 1,000 years from now, you and I are not living 1,000 years from now, but we will be giving an account of what we did when we live now. So really, that's my answer to, how I would answer that question. And hope that makes sense to you, Pastor. Okay. All right. So we're going to get ready to close here. And I know that there are many people, that may have. There's one other question, Dr. Mignot, that was asked, and I want to ask it of you, Dr. Mignot. Someone had posted it in the chat, and that is, can you choose which vaccine to take? Can you choose? And I just want to give you an opportunity to answer that. Dr. Mignot?
Okay, I don't think at this stage that you can choose the vaccine given the constraints of supply. The two vaccines on the market now are nearly identical, and so there's really no difference. You've heard about the Pfizer vaccine need to be at a lower temperature than the Moderna vaccine, but that's really because of the coating that the vaccine is in. The vaccine itself, the mRNA is the same exact product. The one thing I want to say related to that question, though, is that if you decide to get your first shot with the Moderna vaccine, you have to stay with the Moderna vaccine. Likewise, the Pfizer vaccine, you have to stay with that. You can't interchange them, even though they're similar vaccine, because there's just no study to see how they would work if they're interchanged.
Very, very, very important, very salient point there. Thank you so much. Can't mix and match. Can't mix and match. Thank you so much, Dr. Mignot. As we close, I want to thank Dr. Mignot and Bishop Henfield for making themselves available. Really appreciate the wealth of information that they have provided, and hope that it certainly proves helpful to us. I also want to make you aware that we have some upcoming similar conferences, and to stay tuned. We're going to be, during the month of February, in particular, focusing on the Black church, and looking at its history, looking at its theology, looking at its challenges, as well as its future. We're also going to be talking down the road, and we'll interject a little bit of it in February, but also the Caribbean church and how the Caribbean church relates to the Black church. But down the road, we'll also be talking and focusing on the Caribbean church. Again, its genesis, its theology, and its challenges, as well as its future. So we're looking forward to doing that. We're also, in the next few weeks, going to start a discussion on immigration. I've had the privilege of being involved in a well-publicized immigration case. Many of you may have heard of the Jamaican family in Philadelphia that recently were free to leave sanctuary. They had lived in a church for 2.5 years. I had come to know them personally and worked with them over those 2 years to get them free. And we're giving God thanks that they are. The story was covered nationwide as well as internationally. And I had the opportunity of also being the first speaker at the press conference. But what we are trying to do is to raise the intelligence quotient and the activity of our churches, particularly our Caribbean and our diasporan churches, in understanding and dealing with this issue of immigration. Many of our congregants are undocumented, and we have to minister to them. So keep that in mind, that we will be talking about this issue of immigration in great detail in a few short weeks and in the months which lie ahead. We also invite you to our Facebook page, Christianity for Living Facebook page, and there you will find much of what we have. This recording will be on there, and recordings of many other discussions that we have had, as well as surveys that we have that we invite you to take, so that we can get responses to the questions that we have. And just before we close, we do have two quick polls that we want to have you take very quickly. As you know, the polls take only a few seconds. So we have two quick polls, and we're going to pull them up here, and we'll be finished within the next few minutes. The first poll number 4, I believe it is. Poll number 4. Question is, does your denomination or your church have a statement of position on vaccines and vaccination? Do you have a statement of a position on it? Yes, no, or you don't know? We'll just give you 10 seconds. Okay, we can close the poll. Let's see the results. Thank you for that response. The second and final poll is the one. Will you be taking the vaccine? Yes, no, or will you wait and see? Okay, we can close the poll. Thank you so much for your responses. I want to thank my daughter Christina for producing this this presentation. She is the one in the background making sure that everything works smoothly. Thanks to her, and thanks to Minister Elder Maurice Powell, who did a fantastic job in helping with the promotion of this. And again, thanks to all of you from all over. Whether it's New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Florida, and keep in mind the things that we have coming up. And we will be sure, do write us, send us a message, the email address, and we'll just pull that up again for you. Our email address, contact information, if you could just pull that up one last time. Yes, there's you have our number. You can give us a call, or you can email us, or you can visit our Facebook page. So that information is there. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to keep in contact with you, and so that we can notify you about the things that we're doing and where God is leading us, and so that you can partner with us. So thanks again to all of you for joining us, and we hope that this has been a productive, reflective, interactive, applicative, practical presentation for you, and that you are better, as we say, as they say in some churches, better now than you were when you came in and started it, and that you feel more equipped, and that you feel more knowledgeable, and that you feel more comfortable in going forth in ministry and ministering and assisting your congregants and your members. God bless you. And we're going to dismiss right now. And thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye now.